Hi, it's Thursday, November 6th, and we've got our same two systems active in the Western Pacific today. We've got Typhoon Kalmaegi sitting over the South China Sea, which is re-intensified into a strong typhoon and will make landfall in eastern Vietnam later today, near this intensity that is at right now. And across the tropical Pacific, we've got large tropical storm Fung-Wong, which has now been named by the Japan Meteorological Agency, which is likely to become a strong typhoon as it tracks towards the northwest and nears the northern Philippines by late this weekend and into early next week. And this will really be the main focus of the video today, but we are going to start off with Kalmaegi, as the system has been re-intensifying overnight and will make landfall in Vietnam later today. And so if we look at the satellite imagery of the system this morning compared to yesterday morning, we can see a much more organized structure of the system with more symmetric cold cloud tops immediately surrounding the eye of the storm, which has been periodically trying to clear out overnight. Now, the system is likely near its peak intensity of what it's going to get to in the South China Sea. As we go towards landfall, wind shear is going to begin to increase in a more vertical aspect. So up to this point, it's been more speed shear, and that's where you have the wind directions not really changing all too much with height throughout the atmosphere, but you have a stronger flow in, say, the mid levels of the atmosphere compared to the surface. And that's really what we've had throughout much of this trek across the South China Sea for the system, is that we've had light easterly flow at the surface and stronger easterly flow in the mid to upper parts of the troposphere. And that has left the system with some moderate speed shear. Now, it has not been so significant like we talked about it wouldn't be to stop the system from re-intensifying significantly. But as we get towards landfall, we're seeing a more vertical aspect of the shear take place. And we can see this very clearly if we take a sounding from the HAFS model here. Going into landfall, you can see we have a reversal of the surface winds. And so now we've got more southwesterly flow near the surface with strong 25 to 30 knot flow in the mid upper part of the troposphere. And then an effectiveness is a rapid rise in the wind shear magnitude as we get towards landfall, with the deep layer value being about 31 knots. And that's a very strong shear, and that will cause the system to weaken in all likelihood before landfall. Now, the question has been over the past few days, how much weakening is going to occur? And one unfortunate aspect is this system being with, again, this strong mid to upper level flow, this is accelerating the storm's forward motion to a pretty significant degree. And we can see this very clearly if we look at the infrared loop. I mean, it's racing across the South China Sea today. And so that means that the shear is probably not going to have enough time to appreciably weaken the winds of the storm. We're not going to see it rapidly decay on approach to Vietnam. We may see it drop a category if you're going for Saffir-Simpson scale equivalents. It may drop from a category 4 to a category 3 prior to landfall. But regardless, that's still a strong typhoon coming into the eastern coast of Vietnam, likely later today. And that's been the key message that I've said for the past few days, and that's the general expectation from the forecast that I've seen, and also this forecast model from the HAFS. You can see by landfall, which it's forecast to be around 12C, this is still a Category 3 equivalent by this time. And the winds are probably higher here because part of the eye wall is onshore, so it naturally is going to be lower due to friction. But still strong typhoon coming in here on the model, and this will cause a pretty significant surge along and north of where the system makes landfall in Vietnam later today, alongside heavy rainfall being brought into inland areas as it races off towards the west. Now, speaking to rainfall, that will be the primary risk going forward after landfall, as a combination of the land interaction with that stronger shear will cause the system to rapidly decay once it moves inland. But once we move inland, we may see a broad swath of some heavy rainfall across Vietnam and surrounding countries. And we can see this very clearly if we look at the GFS rainfall over the next few days. You can see where the eye wall comes through in Vietnam. We can see localized totals of 200 to 300 millimeters, and that could lead to some localized flooding in spots today where the core comes through. But as it degrades further and pushes inland, we see a more broad swath of these deeper purples, which is about 125 to 150 millimeters of rainfall, with some localized spots in here getting higher than 150 millimeters. And so that may lead to some widespread flooding issues across some of these countries here surrounding Vietnam, across Southeast Asia, and that will be the primary risk going forward for the storm over the next few days. But that's all that I've got for Kalmaegi. That will be my last video on that system, as once it makes my video tomorrow, this system will be degrading inland, and then really the forecasting phase of that system by that point is done. And so now we can shift all of our focus into the open tropical Pacific with newly named Tropical Storm Fung-Wong over the tropical Pacific. And this is forecast to be a big storm for the Philippines, figuratively and literally, as the system is a very big storm still today. We can see the very broad influence that it has, with the center being well southwest of Guam, for example, but we're still getting outer bands, likely bringing some gusty conditions to a lot of these Mariana Islands, and that will continue throughout the day today, and may also continue in islands like Palau further towards the south and west. But for now, we're not seeing the system rapidly intensify yet because of this broad size. And like we talked about yesterday, the short-term trends and progression of the system is going to be pretty gradual. We're not expecting the system to rapidly intensify going into Thursday and Friday because it still needs time to consolidate a more compact vorticity maximum in the center of the storm. Now, we are seeing that gradual progression continue on. If we look at the convection this morning, we can see convection is continuing to get more focused into the center of the storm. And this is aided by the upper low environment, which is now very favorable for the system. And you can see in the streamlines, winds going away from the storm in the upper low parts of the atmosphere practically in all directions. So you've got a lot of divergence, which is helping the convective process be pretty efficient in the center of the storm. And throughout that process, that will allow a tighter vorticity maximum to form. And we can see this happen if we go onto the HAFS model. This is showing you the low level vorticity or spin in this yellow coloring. And you can see at the initialization of this, it's a very broad signature overall. We've got some tighter vorticity maximums, but the overall signature is very broad. But as we go in time, as the convection continues to be more consolidated near the center of the storm, we see a more compact bubble or zone of vorticity form in the center of the storm. And by this point, which is expected to be about Friday morning or Friday afternoon local time, so about a day or more now, from now, we see the system start to form a more coherent inner core structure, that being an eye wall structure. And you can see on the HAFS model, this is by 21Z Fridays. This is going into Saturday morning local time. And now we're getting a more coherent inner core structure forming with a more compact zone of strong winds consolidated around the center of the storm. And by this point, this is when we would likely start seeing the storm intensify pretty significantly in winds and in pressure. Up to this point, the pressure is forecast to gradually decrease, and we're likely going to see the winds gradually increase as well, slowly up to a typhoon. But once we get to this point, shear is forecast to still be low. We can go out to that time frame on the model by this point, and you'll see that perhaps some increasing easterly shear, but overall, we still got plentiful divergence off to the west, off to the east, and off to the northeast from this trough over Japan further up north. And so this will likely foster a quick intensification phase as we make our final approach to the northern Philippines. And this is even more helped by the very warm waters that we have across this part of the Pacific. You can see across this entire zone, 29 to 30 degrees Celsius waters. And like I mentioned yesterday, it's not just at the surface. This warmth extends greatly with depth beneath the ocean's surface. And one thing I didn't do, and I meant to do it, but I didn't show the progression of this model forecast through time as the system goes through all of these warm waters. And one thing to note is that even though we are consolidating into a more compact low, note that we still have a fairly broad tropical storm force wind field. And normally this may be a cause of concern for the system's intensification, because at some point a storm can get so big that it's not good for itself, to where you have all these tropical storm force winds and typhoon force winds and higher end storms, to where they start to upwell cold water more significantly ahead of the eye, so that by the time the eye moves over, the waters are simply too cold for the system to maintain its intensity. But that's not going to be a concern here, and I can show you this very clearly if we progress in the model forecast here as it progresses through all these warm waters. And you'll see that even though we see the system get very intense, the pressure goes down to near 900 millibars, not a pressure that many storms really ever get to, even in the Western Pacific. We really don't see too much of a decrease in sea surface temperatures across this track. So that shows you that there's high ocean heat content here. So that warmth is not just kept to the surface. It's also with great depth below the surface. So this system has virtually a ton of fuel to fuel really the intensification for the next few days. And that's why so many models are projecting this system to intensify so significantly, even in the face of potentially some increasing moderate shear on approach to the Philippines. And if we look at this upper level flow plot again as we approach the Philippines, you'll see where that shear comes from. We have a general increase in easterly flow across the Philippine Sea and the South China Sea. And that's because we have general high pressure off to the north. But similar to a case like we have with Kalmaegi, this is more so a speed shear, not a vertical shear. And like I've used with my barrel analog for the past couple of days, we've seen in past that storms that are strong like Fung-Wong is forecast to be, it may take a lot of time for that speed shear to have a significant impact on the vortex. And so for that reason, we're likely to have the system still be very intense by the time it comes into landfall here in the Philippines. And that's the current expectation from Pagasa. You can see again the very gradual intensification for the next few days going into Friday and into Saturday, becoming a typhoon by Friday afternoon. But then after that, we see more significant intensification, becoming a super typhoon by Saturday night or early on Sunday morning, and maintaining that intensity as it nears landfall in the northern Philippines. And I imagine they're still forecasting a landfall as a super typhoon in northern Luzon, as that is the current model consensus that we're going to have this storm very strong by landfall here in the northern Philippines. Now, one thing to note is that it's not one thing to do is not to focus on the exact center point of the track. And we talk about this a lot with these storms. That's very important not to do that. But I think for this storm especially, it is going to be very important for the Philippines and surrounding areas, because the system is forecast to be so large. You can see already the wind field is very large. Now, it will likely contract some as we get more compact over the next few days, but even as we go throughout the next few days, as it peaks in intensity, we may see structural changes internally that do tend to increase the storm size. And so what you'll see on the HASS model is that by landfall in the Philippines, this is a very large typhoon. And it's not just typhoon force winds that are over a very broad zone. These pinks and getting into whites, that's very strong typhoon force winds, which could be of super typhoon force across a very large area. And note how broad this is. This encompasses a large region of Luzon. Now, that's not saying the entire coast of Luzon or inland areas of Luzon are going to feel super typhoon force winds, as there is high terrain here that will help to negate alongside friction a lot of the areas from getting the super typhoon force winds. But that means a broad area in Luzon and the islands further north will likely feel the effects of the typhoon force winds, even if the center never makes landfall close to any of those spots. And so that will also mean large surge. And my concern is especially high for the islands north of Luzon, as those islands are particularly susceptible to the winds of the storm, but also the storm surge, as there's not really too much land. They're not landlocked like much of Luzon here. And so they will feel the full brunt of the storm as it comes through. Now, another thing that will also be of significance as the system comes in is it will likely be turning north by this part in the forecast. That's as the ridge that is currently steering it to the west-northwest starts to turn it to the north in this part of the forecast. And what you'll see is that by this point in the forecast, these two forecast points get very close to each other. And it's natural that storms do slow down as they start to make their northward turn. Now, exactly where this turn occurs, that's going to be a crucial detail to get right in this forecast. Does it happen over the Philippines, or does it happen over the South China Sea? Partially because that does have intensity implications for Taiwan, Japan, and southern China going forward. But especially for the Philippines, if it does start to make this turn over land, that means we could see the system slow down significantly over land before making that turn towards the north. And if that happens, we could see very high rainfall totals across the northern Philippines, and that would change the wind impact as the winds come down to a more significant rainfall threat across this northern part of the Philippines if that does come to fruition. Now, hopefully we can see the system make this turn over water, as that would mean the heaviest rainfall would tend to stay over the South China Sea, but that would mean still that we have outer bands rolling in. So we could be looking at, regardless, very heavy rainfall across the Philippines as the system starts to make that northward turn. And for areas further north, southern Japan, Taiwan, and the south coast of China, one good part of us being in early November now is the waters have cooled off significantly with cold fronts now coming down from the north. And so, as the system starts to make that northward turn, it will have little trouble in upwelling very cool waters from beneath the surface. So, we're not looking at the system re-intensifying at a very significant pace as it turns to the north, but it could still be, again, a large typhoon as it comes north. So, we could see a lot of storm surge impacts, especially across Taiwan and southern Japan, but also a wide expanse of rainfall, which could lead to significant rainfall totals, especially in Taiwan with the high terrain there. So a very significant and large impact event likely incoming for a lot of areas here in the Western Pacific, and I'll have more videos on this as we go in time towards the west-northwest in the system's track over the next few days. But stay safe in Vietnam as Kalmaegi comes in later today, and that's all that I've got for now. Thanks for watching.